Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, I understand we will be sitting this afternoon until 3:45 and skipping the break, so I'll continue with my questions. And these are questions that I expect will be focused or directed towards Mr. Tatey on the Creel survey. Mr. Tatey, I understand that the purpose of a Creel survey is stock assessment rather than catch monitoring for enforcement purposes. Is that correct, and could you comment on why that's the case?
Yes, it is. The program we run is science-based. One of the things that certainly we like to do is collect information from the recreational community that's unbiased, and one of the things that may taint or bias the information that's provided to us would be if anglers have the perception or think that we are in fact enforcing fishery regulations as well. That's one of the main reasons we would separate. That's one of the main reasons why we consider ourselves a survey and not any sort of fishery monitoring
And
program.
along those lines, I think you described earlier about a Creel surveyor might ask to inspect or look at the catch, someone's catch, or the fish they have. But in that situation, it's not a power of inspection. They're not looking at the fish with the view to writing a ticket or dealing with a violation if there's something inappropriate that's occurred. Is that right?
That's correct. The survey we conduct is a survey. It's completely voluntary. So we ask the anglers if we can ask them some questions about their fishing experience, and they can decline us with no recourse at all on our part. And that's the same with follow-up questions would be if they have indicated that they've harvested salmon. A follow-up question would be, would they mind if we looked at their catch?
With the Creel surveys that are conducted in the lower Fraser, do those, am I right that they relate to all species of salmon, including sockeye?
Yes. Yeah, we would, any fish that we encounter, any salmon species we encountered in the catch would be recorded regardless of species.
Now, you've been for some time giving presentations that I know your colleagues refer to as a Creel 101, but an introduction and explanation of the Creel survey as it's conducted. Is that right?
Yes.
And in October, you gave a presentation to my colleague, Ms. Grant, and me, and I'd like to refer Mr. Lund, please, to number 29 from the list of exhibits. And when it shows on screen, you'll see that it indeed gives it away at the top, presented to the Cohen Commission on October 26, 2010 in Vancouver. Do you recognize that as the Creel presentation that you gave to us?
Yes.
I'd like this to be marked as an exhibit, please.
Exhibit number 532.
Mr. Tatey, what I'll try to do here is lead you through this document. This document is in evidence, and indeed I'll editorialize to say is a helpful resource for those looking to understand the Creel survey as it's conducted. It has maps on it. It has some pictures which are helpful in giving a sense of things. But more importantly, the discussion here and the methodology is set out. So I'll take you to some more specific points rather than going through the whole document. What I'd like to do first is to go to page, let's say page 2. And welcome you to refer to page 2 and page 3. Could you explain the goal and purposes of the Creel survey, please?
Yeah, and in subsequent, I should point out, in subsequent presentations, I've merged these two slides, but certainly the primary goal of our survey would be to determine catch and effort. Catch in this case being harvest. That's what most people want to know. Secondary information that we can collect is information on releases. We can also collect, and this is all done by species. We could also collect biological information, whether or not the fish is marked for other scientific studies, assessments that are going on. We'll also gear method used, what the angler is targeting. Those are other things that we can collect with our survey.
And I think some of these terms will probably be self-apparent, but let me just confirm. Effort, what does effort refer to? If it's helpful, there's definitions that show on pages 4 and 5, and as I look at page 5, in the middle we see reference to effort.
In
That
order to
refers to basically the time, you use time as the measurements tool, I suppose, to determine to look at the conduct or the time that's put in by anglers.
Yeah, there's two inputs to the equation that we use to generate any catch estimate, whether it's harvest or release. And one of those inputs is a rate of release, rate of harvest, rate of catch. It's how many fish you've caught in an hour. The other input is the effort. The product of those two, multiplying those two together, will give you an estimate of catch. And we do the same thing for harvest and release. It all depends on what you're talking about. Do you want catch, which includes harvest and release? Do you just want harvest? Do you just want released?
Right. And so let's look at page 4, please, of this document. And page 4 gives us harvest per unit effort. We'll talk about the number of the harvest. In other words, a kept or retained fish per unit effort would be, for example, if one uses an hour of angler time on the water, you might generate a number to say that the number of fish kept per single angler's single hour, for example. I don't know if those are the measurements you might use, but that would reflect the HPUE, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So when we interview anglers, we ask them for harvest per unit effort, we ask them how many fish have they harvested by species, and we also ask how long they have been fishing. And a minor point is we do make the distinction. We want anglers, we ask them about how long they've been actively fishing. Certainly if an angler is taking a break for an hour for lunch, it's not something we want to roll up in an effort. So that's how we do get harvest per unit effort, release per unit effort, catch per unit effort from angler interviews, and it is basically just what they've caught over the time they spent actively fishing.
Page 6 of this document refers to the estimated harvest. I take it this is the formula for estimating harvest?
Yeah, that's the formula I referred to earlier, where the two inputs, one is a total effort calculation, and the other is a rate, harvest per unit effort. In this case, with our survey, it's angler hour.
And if we look at moving to page 7, this is a discussion about the harvest per unit effort, and it gives us a description of how that calculation is done. Could you help us, could you explain that, please?
This slide shows how we collect the information. So we have surveyors, this information, the rate of harvest in this example here is collected from angler interviews. We will be surveying anglers and asking them for information on harvest and how long they've been actively fishing. There are 7 days in a week, and there's a randomness to how we sample the days. We do not sample every day. When we can't sample all daylight hours, budget constraints don't allow us to do that. And in fact, you may not get any better resolution to any estimate by going that full distance. We sample, we have shifts during the full daylight hours, because during the summer months when sockeye are running, we will, it can be light. People can be angling on the river at 6 a.m. in the morning, and they can be fishing till 10 o'clock at night. So we will have two shifts to cover the full daylight hours. The weekends, we sample all weekends and holidays. Those are days that are usually of high effort, and we want to capture those. The weekdays, now did I say weekday and holidays? I meant to say weekend and holidays. We sample all of those days. Mm-hmm. Weekdays are the days we randomly sample. Generally, it's about 3 of the 5 weekdays that we will sample in a week. And the days off for our creel surveys are taken during the weekdays. So this is how we construct our surveyors to collect the information on rates, harvest rate.
And the creel surveyors are interviewing, obviously, anglers. It's a voluntary process, I take, from what you've described for
Yes.
the angler. How does a creel surveyor and how does the study account for the fact that someone might be lying about their catch? And I suppose fish stories being what they are, they might be lying by saying they caught more than they did and released, or conversely misrepresenting how much they kept or caught. But how do you, is that something that can be accounted for?
If there's intent there for an angler to lie, there's really no mechanism to, currently in our survey, there's no mechanism to catch that. Unless the angler has harvested something. On release numbers are obviously different than a harvest number. If an angler has said he's harvested a salmon, one of the follow-up questions is, can we inspect your catch? So certainly there's a verification process there. We get a really strong, there are very few anglers that we survey that refuse to be interviewed. And depending on the year, it can be up to 95% of the anglers that have said they've harvested something, let us inspect their catch. That varies, could be 75% up to 95%. So to me, that's a fairly good sample. And the amount of misreporting on numbers, I haven't seen one since I've been involved in this program in 2008. I haven't seen where someone has said they caught 2, but they've shown us 3. So I think that answers the question there. On the release numbers, it's different. There's nothing for us to ask there's nothing we can get from the angler in the interview process to verify how many fish he said he released.
Ms. Netton.
Used a bonus mic, sorry. When you're talking about whether or not somebody's going to be telling the truth, you have to look not just at the recreational fishery, but at all fisheries, we can look at all salmon fisheries and whether or not, what type of catch monitoring program they have. If it's not a mandatory landing program where somebody's inspecting your catch, there's the opportunity for somebody to misrepresent. And it may be intentional, it may be unintentional. And in the recreational fishery, for the most part, what we find is if there's a misrepresentation, it's usually unintentional, and it's usually more about releases than catch, because we're inspecting catch. And if you're in a situation where there's a lot of fish going through at a time that you're not allowed to keep, when you start releasing them, when you get over 3 or 4 fish, you start to lose track of how many fish you've released.
Slide 8, page 8 of this gives us the calculation for harvest per unit effort. I think that's probably self-explanatory. Let me ask you a question to go back, Mr. Tatey, to this question about what happens with faulty information or inaccurate information. Is there a process to account for answers that simply don't fit, outliers or information in the Creel survey that is far off base from the other information that's being collected?
One thing that I will do and our biologists will do with the information is we do look for outliers and see if they can be explained. If someone has indicated that they've released 25 Chinook and they've only been fishing for an hour, and we look at other anglers within the same area in the same time period that have not even come close to that sort of rate of release, it certainly draws light to that record. And those records can be and will be removed. It's very few that are. And the amount of sampling that we do, whether we include those or do not include those, it's not going to sway the result in any meaningful way, because there are so few of those outliers. But it is something we do, and we look, and yes, there are some that we will exclude.
2 different versions or components of effort. Calculated for the day is daily effort, calculated for the entire fishery reflects total effort. And then if we turn to page 10, daily effort, there's reference here to hourly rod counts and instantaneous effort or rod counts. If you could please explain what those refer to.
The effort calculation is probably a little more problematic to explain than just the rate calculation. There's 2 pieces of information we need to calculate total effort, and one of them is an activity profile, or we conduct on an hourly basis at some points along the river. We get an activity profile of the number of anglers fishing every hour, and that's what you see in what's labeled number 10. Starting at 5 o'clock in the morning and working to 2000 hours. Those are the number of rods we've counted in a particular site, a particular location on the river. And what we do then, the second part of the effort calculation is on a day that's randomly chosen, one day on the weekend and one day during the week, we will do a instantaneous effort count of the whole study area. Usually on the Fraser it's from an overflight. More than not it's from an overflight, where we will fly from the top of Coquihalla, or the Coquihalla River confluence, all the way down to Mission Bridge, and we will conduct angler counts. The time of day at which we do that count, we can then look at that activity profile, and if the activity profile says that 10% of the anglers of the total, 10% of the anglers for the whole day were fishing at that time, then we know that, or the assumption is that our overflight count makes up 10% of the total daily effort. That gives us the total, that gives us the daily effort. And then for total effort, we'll multiply that daily effort by the number of days in the study, in the study period or analysis period.
For the hourly rod counts, are the results of an hourly rod count, can they be extrapolated to other parts of the river?
Yes, and that is what we do. So those are conducted at various sites along the river. And yes, the assumption is that that profile we see on those, it represents the entire study area.
And so I'm going to do this by way of the pictures on page 10. There's a helicopter, a plane, a boat, and then someone on a bridge with binoculars. I take it, what does the hourly rod count as described here refer to? Is that the fellow on the bridge?
And the boat. The bridge, that one's actually on the Chilliwack River, and he's got binoculars. So on the top of every hour, he will count how many rods or how many anglers are actively fishing in a defined area. The larger the area, the better, and that's what he's doing on Keith Wilson Bridge there. We can also get hourly rod counts by boat, and that's something we do in the Fraser main stem, where we will leave Island 22, in this example, in the picture, travel down to Grassy Bar, which is maybe a 4 or 5 minute boat ride, and count how many rods are fishing from Island 22 down to Grassy Bar, and that's conducted on every hour.
I should go back to ask you one other question on the landing sites. If surveys are conducted based on landing sites, what is the process for determining what the catch or harvest is all along the river?
The landing sites provide us the rate. So they provide us the catch or harvest or release per unit effort, which is the angler hour, or I should also the rod hour, because that's what we're really counting is actively fishing rods that are actively engaged in fishing. So the access sites, the interview sites, provide us with the rate, the activity profile, and the overflight that gets us that instantaneous effort count provides us with the effort. So I think that answers, I hope that answers the question. Deb, you've got something?
Yeah, I would just say that when we use Island 22, it is a major boat launch in the Chilliwack area that draws fishermen that go to a variety of fishing sites from that area. So they can go upstream an hour, downstream half an hour, whatever, and they all funnel into that Island 22 area. So when you get an interview from Island 22, they may not have been fishing right there, they've been fishing somewhere else, and it is generally representative of the entire study area.
So in that sense, I take it the landing site approach gives you first a picture of who's fishing right there, but secondly, people that are coming in from other areas on the river?
Yes, and everything in between. There are some access sites that you're only interviewing anglers that fished at that particular site, and then there are access sites like Island 22, which is a boat launch, as Deb mentioned, that really the catch per unit effort that we're getting there is a blend of many, many different angling sites.
The concepts of accuracy and precision are A, they're distinct, and B, they're important to creel surveys. Could you please help us by explaining that, Mr. Tatey?
Sure. I mean, accuracy and precision are sometimes terms, especially in my experience with fisheries, that are, to me, are misunderstood. And the way I look at precision is precision has to do with the repeatability of getting the same result if you conducted another sample from the population of interest. So it's a repeatability. If you sampled multiple times, how close would those results be to each other? If they're far apart, then it's not precise. If they're tight together, then it's precise. Accuracy, sometimes people look at precision as accuracy, but accuracy is more to do with how close your result or your estimate is to the truth. And that's more accuracy. So the two are separate. And so things like precision would be when we give a point estimate and we say it's plus or minus 15%. And the plus or minus 15% would be a precision estimate.
With respect to the creel data that's collected in the field, I understand that it's collected into a database that's called CREST, C-R-E-S-T, that at this point, CREST is being developed, and I'll just state this and then welcome your comment and see if I have it right. The CREST software is being developed. At this point, it doesn't yet give you an analysis function. At this point, the data is being put into Excel for use.
This past year, we actually just used CREST.
Okay.
What occurred, just a little backup, a little history, we had a software package that was developed in the 80s. It ran off a platform, a computer platform that was DOS-based. That software program was developed by a consulting company called DPA, so we call it the DPA software. And but the current platform we have for our operating system for our computers doesn't support that program. So 3 years ago, the development of a new software program that would be supported by our current system and do more things, I suppose, as well, and more integrated with within the region. In the interim, that program called CREST, as you did, it's not finished yet. Currently, we're in the testing stage on generating estimates. There's a couple of components to that software program, and one of them is the data entry tool, so the entering of the data. The other component to the CREST software is the analytical tool to be able to generate estimates. And over the last couple of years, we've been testing the data entry end of it. For a number of years, for 2 years, 1 year we entered it in both systems. This past year, having conducted the testing on the data entry part, we just entered it into CREST. The analytical end of it, though, is not complete yet. We haven't done the final testing on that yet. So currently, the analytical component of what we do is being done in Excel right now as an interim measure.
Slide 20 on this presentation. And without going into great detail, let me try and focus on and ask you via this table to help us to determine the estimated harvest for sockeye in 2009. And we'll look, I take it, to the last column, 2009 total. Sockeye is about in the middle of the page. That's a 0. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And I take it that number doesn't account for or doesn't allow for any illegal recreational harvest or inadvertent harvest, for example, someone who's misidentifying species?
It would have accounted for any inadvertent harvest. When people have harvested salmon, we do ask to inspect the catch. So if there is a species identification, for instance, an angler thought it was a Chinook, but it turned out to be a sockeye, then we would record that as a sockeye, and you would see that show up as a harvest amount there. And there's nothing in that year. In some of the summary tables of previous years, you'll notice there's a couple of years where there may be 11 sockeye harvested, and that's probably the result of one of those instances where we had one interview that harvested a sockeye when they shouldn't have.
And I'll take you to the next page, and then under the 2007 column, sockeye, about 2/3 of the way down, we see exactly that number.
Right.
11. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah. So on inadvertent harvest, yes, we will absolutely get a taste of that with our surveying, and it does occur. And that's where that 11 right there, that's what that would reflect.
And again, if we go back to the page before, just for one further question, the 2009 totals, I took you to the estimated harvest, and just to complete the picture, estimated release of sockeye, a little over 20,000.
Correct.
Those are numbers that come from interviews with anglers who describing what they've caught and released, and then working from those answers, multiplying the release per unit effort by your numbers for the effort, calculated using rod counts and overflights.
Yes.
Am I right that your team, when you're conducting this survey, produces reports about every 2 weeks?
That's the goal. Generally, without any regulation changes, and historically, recently, we've, last a couple of years or so, we've generated estimates generally around the 15th of the middle of the month, from say the 1st to the 15th, and then another estimate that goes from the 16th to the end of the month.
And are those reports posted on the department's website?
They are.
I take it you're also able to generate reports or graphs or what have you, but to reflect that information to fisheries managers?
Yes.
I'll take you now to some documents. Number 32 on our list of exhibit. This is an email that you were CC'd on from Jason Mahoney, who you work with, to Timber Whitehouse. I take it you report to Timber Whitehouse, am I?
Yes, I report to Timber.
And this indeed gives us some Excel spreadsheets that are attached. If we look at the second page, for example. Is this an example of you generating numbers? This is August 2009 that the email attaching these was sent. Is this an example of that sort of process where you're generating numbers in the middle of a season and presenting that information in different graphs?
Yes, yes it is.
If I could ask this be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 533.
And Ms. Grant raises with me that there's in fact two documents. There's the email and then the attachments to it. I wonder if the attachment should be A within that number?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
The 533A.
Tab number 33 from our list of exhibits. Is entitled The General Overview on the Fraser Recreational Fishery Estimates. Did you prepare this document?
Yes, I did.
I'd ask this be marked as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 534.
Is this, I take it you've reviewed this fairly recently, is this an accurate description of how the Creel survey is conducted in basic terms?
Yeah, I would say so.
Thank you. Number 34 on the list of exhibits. We have sender and recipient both on this panel. I suppose that's convenient. From you, Mr. Tatey, to Ms. Snedden, November 25, 2009, providing information on the 2009 Fraser River recreational fishery. And I understand that you sent that.
I'm sorry, I think I have the different.
You do, and I may have misspoken. Number 34 on our list, please.
That's what I have.
All right.
Could just be-
That's fine. We'll. The ringtail number is CAN 044406.
That's what we have. Perhaps it's mislabeling.
That's all right, but now I wonder what you have. Why don't I set that aside, and we may pick up on that if we need to, or I may. Ms. Gronda McNeil's passing up a copy of it. I'll set that aside, though, for now.
Thank you.
And without going to any particular document. Which one? I think we did. Yeah. Let me just ask you, without taking it any particular document, during the 2009 fishing season, I take it that you had, probably like other fishing seasons, concerns expressed about the creel methods?
In 2009, if you're referring to the document, the 34,
Yeah, I'm trying not to do it with any documents, and that's the difficulty you may have and I may have, but other people don't. Let me simply do this. I'm going to move you to a different document, please, number 35 on our list of exhibits, with my fingers crossed, Mr. Lunn. This seems to be a draft recreational fishery monitoring and catch reporting consultation document from September 2004. Is that right?
It is, but as I think this is the first time I had seen this was in my first interview with yourself.
That was something you
Yeah.
saw through the commission, but not
Yeah,
prior to that.
That's right. I had not seen it before, and I haven't, other than looking at the page that we reviewed, I have not reviewed it since,
Okay.
or looked at it since. I think just get back to your question too. No, I mean, there isn't a season that goes by that people don't raise concerns about the recreational assessment that we conduct on the river.
Now, it's artificial having had a witness say he hadn't seen this before the commission, but I will ask that this number 35 from the list please be marked as an exhibit.
Exhibit number 535.
Ms. Snedden and Ms. Adams, I'd like to put to you and ask you to address some of the criticisms that have been made of, and Mr. Tatey as well, of the Creel survey. In our policy and practice report, we've simply identified some of the different kinds of criticisms that are made. There are some criticisms that are made about the whole methodology or approach. There are some criticisms that are different in nature that seem to suggest if more resources were put in, if there were more surveyors and more overflights, it's not that the process is flawed, but it's not done in a powerful enough way. And likewise, there are some who say that the Creel approach significantly overrepresents the impact of the recreational fishery. There are others who say it significantly underrepresents. So I'd like you to please respond to some of those concerns and criticisms. Ms. Adams.
So the department's catch monitoring programs for all of our fisheries vary from probably the best monitoring occurs in our groundfish fisheries, where we have onboard observers, dockside monitoring, mandatory hail out, hail in, mandatory logbooks. So that would be sort of the Cadillac or the Porsche system, right down to fisheries where we don't have any monitoring. For instance, in the recreational fishery, we have limits on sand dollars and starfish, but we don't monitor them at this time. And then we have salmon fisheries monitoring, which varies for all of the different harvesting groups. And generally speaking, we have coverage during peak times in peak areas and on peak fisheries, and it really depends on the season and the type of fishery we're having and the funding that we have available. And Deb and Joe can probably speak in more detail with regards to the Fraser's monitoring programs.
Thank you, Ms. Snedden.
Right, I think there's definitely been comments made around the methodology for Creel programs, both in Strait of Georgia and in the Fraser River. There have been a number of reviews of those types of programs, scientific reviews, peer-reviewed. The methodology is an accepted methodology for the size and scope of fishery that the recreational fishery encompasses. We're comfortable with that. What in recent years and in resources have been a problem, and sometimes you don't have enough money to do what you'd like to do. I think any catch monitoring program, whether it's recreational, First Nation, or commercial, some resources additional resources could help us in getting better estimates. The question is how much better of an estimate? If our point estimate is plus or minus 5 or 10%, do you need to spend a lot of money to get plus or minus 5%? It doesn't make any difference in your management. So those are trade-offs that we have to look at when we're allocating our budgets every year. Questions around overestimating and underestimating harvests. Yeah, I think there's definitely questions from all sectors about the recreational catch and release numbers, and we try to we're doing our best in order to educate people around our programs. That's the main problem, is that there's a real lack of understanding of how we do catch monitoring programs in all sectors. And we've, through a variety of forums, started to, at least in the past 4 years, started to educate people. So at the local Sport Fish Advisory Committee meetings, I've brought out presentations on both their catch monitoring program and the First Nation catch monitoring program in the area, and tried to educate them. We're doing the same on the First Nation side of things when we meet with them. And we're hoping that once they gain an understanding of both the commonalities of these programs and about what their own programs are, there'll be more trust in those numbers.
Why do you think there is such a misunderstanding?
In some cases, it is, if you read Joe's Creel 101, it's not the easiest document to read. The presentation, it's not, if you're a layperson, it's not that easy. It's a difficult topic, and I think that that's part of it. I think another part, at least on the recreational side of things, is, they're all volunteers. They're committed to recreational fisheries, but they are also going to 1 million meetings about recreational fisheries, and they're overwhelmed with information already. And the catch information probably just is the lowest priority as far as how they do the catch information, how we assess the catch.
And when you say they, who are you referring to?
Recreational anglers.
Thank you.
Sorry.
The Creo 101 presenter, and you face these criticisms. How do you feel those sorts of concerns about the Creel survey?
Concerns, I actually don't have any reservations about accepting criticism or concerns. I think if people are passionate about it and they want to learn and understand what we do, and if they learn and understand what we do, they may have improvements to what we do. We are certainly open, and have stated on numerous occasions, we're open to people providing us with information that's going to help improve what we do. Deb said it well. I have had the perception from some people that this is my Creel survey, it's my design, it's something that I do, and that can't be farther from the truth. This has been developed in the Fraser and the Strait of Georgia back in the mid-'80s. It's used throughout the region. This study design, or a fraternal twin of this study design, is used elsewhere, where you're combining and collecting information in the same manner and putting it together in the same manner. It has been peer reviewed. It's not only used in the recreational fishery, but it's also used in Fraser First Nations FSC fishery, this study design. So it certainly has had opportunity to be kicked around and improved on. But it doesn't mean it can't improve. But Deb also indicated, okay, how much juice for the squeeze? And certainly you can throw more money at an assessment, and I would argue that this assessment, because of the nature of the fishery in the Fraser, this is a moderate to high impact fishery. The assessment dollars that this fishery receives is high. It is in the high end. So I believe there is a proportional amount of money that's directed to assess this fishery. Certainly, some criticisms like, is it an underestimate? Well, it could be very well, because we certainly don't assess certain parts of the Fraser River where recreational fishing takes place and Fraser sockeye can be harvested. We don't, on a routinely basis, we will not, and part of our study area is not downstream of Mission Bridge, but people can recreational angle for sockeye downstream. When we have looked downstream to determine whether or not we're missing anything there, and whether or not the squeeze would be worth the juice, we do not, in our opinion, get results on effort down there that would indicate that we would need to go down there. That missing that effort is significantly biasing our catch estimate in any in a direction. We were fortunate this year from where our overflight left. It was from Pitt Meadows, so this past year we routinely flew downstream of Mission Bridge. We routinely flew from Port Mann to Mission, which is a fair chunk of the river. And if you look at the overflight counts and the percentage of anglers we saw down there fishing relative to the total area, for the time the sockeye are moving through, it's 1%. So the amount of money to assess that area would not be 1%. It'd be a lot of money to assess, and just to get that 1%. So certainly decisions are made like that. Budgetary constraints mean that we don't survey certain areas. So yes, there is some validity to people that might say our estimates are an underestimate because we don't survey that part. It's not rolled up. We don't expand our estimate to include that 1% that's fishing down there.
Ms. Adams, I'll begin with you. Are there particular suggestions for improving how creels are conducted?
I think the bigger question is catch monitoring as a whole, not just creel. Creel's one methodology. We also use logbook reports from different components of the fishery, including electronic logbooks from some of our charter operators and guides. We're looking at, you know, as my colleagues have said, what's the bar? What's the level of standard that we want across all fisheries? And the department has just released a catch monitoring framework which outlines the standards that we want to look at and the risk associated with various fisheries. Like, I don't think it's a high risk that we don't evaluate sand dollar and starfish collection, but in the areas, say, around moderate to high sockeye impacts, we need to have some rigorous programs in those areas, and we're working with the recreational communities to develop different programs. As I mentioned, electronic logbooks. We've just been working with the Sport Fishing Institute and the province of BC on a certified tidal angling guide program for marine waters, of which there is a catch reporting requirement in there.
The CTAG Certified Tidal Angling Guide program is a program that allows for certification of those guides working in tidal waters?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you just expand a little bit on the catch monitoring component to that?
The certified, in order to be an accredited certified professional angling guide in marine waters, you need to pass several modules of training within the accreditation program, and one of the elements in that program is catch reporting and monitoring programs and submissions of information when and where asked for information. And the electronic logbook is one of the methods, as well as hard copy logbooks that we get from lodges and charter boats.
Ms. Sneddon, do you have suggestions for, and I think Ms. Adams quite properly broadened it to catch monitoring, not specific to creel?
No, I think Devona covered it, and I think, as Joe pointed out, you have to really assess whether or not putting any more money or expanding an area is worth the effort. I think what we need to do before we get to the point of saying we need to make changes is make sure we understand what our current programs are coast-wide, what are our priorities coast-wide for all species before we currently don't do the best of jobs at that, but we're currently looking at it now. And once we determine all fisheries, what are all our programs, where's all our money going, and where's the requirement, where's the need the most, and looking at it from that picture, we'll see some places where we can make some change.
One other area that I mentioned earlier this morning was that we would like to build on the electronic technologies that are out there, and we would like to use the licensing system to do random surveys online and through different possibilities of text message reports, or possibly catch record cards associated with it. We see that being used in Washington State and other jurisdictions, and we think there's some merit in trying that here.
Mr. Tay, did you have any comments on the question I asked about catch monitoring improvements?
On catch monitoring improvements, and certainly within my jurisdictional area in the Fraser, there are certainly species that we don't monitor as well as we might do Fraser sockeye or Fraser chinook in the Fraser main stem. The last couple of years, our monitoring program has been truncated at October 15th, but the fishery is still open and coho salmon are coming through at that time. So certainly in the overall catch monitoring picture, that would be an area. Tributary monitoring programs, we do conduct Creel surveys on the Chilliwack River, which has a sockeye population, Cultus sockeye. But again, we start that one in September 15th, and it's more directed at the Chinook. It's a Chinook indicator population, exploitation rate population. So we're really there, the focus there is really Chinook catch, not sockeye, although we do get sockeye release numbers. But we are starting September 15th, and sockeye are in there, Cultus sockeye are in there a lot earlier than that. So, you know, there's an area that's deficient for Fraser sockeye. Those are two examples. I think the one thing that, you know, and it kind of links back as well to a little bit of what Deb talked about, the Creel 101 document that I wrote and the complexity of that, and even that's hard to understand. And I do get that. I wrote this document as a way, when I first started on this program, I wrote this as a way to educate myself on what the Creel survey was doing and how it was generating an estimate. And it wasn't as brief as some of the paragraphs that were on other things, and it wasn't as technical as the technical documents that I went through to do this and the people I talked to write this. So it's more of an intermediate step. But it took me a while, yeah, to understand it. And so absolutely it's going to take people. I think one of the things that we're trying to do, and it does take time and it does take resources, is the program I'm involved in, we do present. The idea is to present this, and if people want to understand what we are doing in the Fraser River and how we are coming up with the estimate, we are more than willing to provide information to them, interact with them, present, have dialogue with them to help them understand what we are doing. And but that does draw resources. It does draw my time. It does draw my staff's time in order to go out there and do these things. So, you know, certainly more resources. Like anyway, you can always use it. But I think the idea, what Deb said, is we need to identify where the priorities lie. So an assessment, an overall assessment of what we've got, where we want to go, what gaps we want to fill in order to get there, what it's going to cost, and start making decisions.
With respect to, I'm almost concluded with my questions. I'd like to go, please, to the PPR, number 7, paragraph 12. And perhaps Mr. Lund can zoom in on paragraph 12. That would be helpful. Ms. Adams, this is a description of what the regulations say about snares and about foul hooking. I understand that foul hooking and the retention of foul-hooked fish may be handled differently in non-tidal water. And could you please help us understand that?
Yeah, the main difference is that anglers are not permitted to retain a foul-hooked fish in freshwater. In marine waters, they may be trolling and in a boat and not know what has taken the hook, and we do allow them to retain a foul-hooked fish in marine waters, in tidal waters, but not in freshwater.
And that's a helpful clarification. My last question, I understand Mr. Lund has tracked down number 34 on our list of exhibits. And as it says, Mr. Tatey, I'll direct this to you. This is provided by you to Ms. Sneddon, providing information on the 2009 Fraser River recreational fishery. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the context, I think it's set out in that background, that the last part of it, that Bill Otway was asked to provide written questions. He did so, and this is an attempt to address concerns that had been raised. Is that right?
That's right.
By the recreational sector.
Yeah, in a meeting that was held between Deb, myself, Devona, and recreational fishery representatives.
Thank you. I'll ask this become the next exhibit. That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Exhibit number 536.
Mr. Timberg is next, and Mr. Commissioner, I should indicate that we, Mr. Timberg and Ms. Grande McNeil separately had prepared on the premise that we had 2 witnesses followed by 1, and they'd asked if they might divide the responsibility as counsel for this evidence, and I had said we'd support them in that, given that we had made that change relatively late, close to the hearings after they'd done preparation work.
Mr. Martin, what are the time estimates for in-chief and cross?
The time estimates, I don't know that I've been, Mr. Timberg, and my expectation may be close to completed or completed today. The time limits for tomorrow leave us in good shape to conclude the evidence tomorrow. I can add them up. I think we'll be fine with that. But I'll put it this way: at one point, I wondered if we would free up extra time in the afternoon tomorrow. I don't think I can safely say that.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. For the record, Mr. Timberg for Canada. I have approximately 15 questions. So, Ms. Adams, the PPR mentions that the recreational fishery for sockeye in the Fraser only emerged in the mid-1980s. Could you please elaborate on why that is?
Yeah, it was the
Oh.
mid to late 90s.
I said mid-1990s, sorry, I misspoke there. So I'll just repeat the question for clarity. The PPR mentions that the recreational fishery for sockeye in the Fraser only emerged in the mid-1990s. Why is that?
There were several things that I guess there was some activity on sockeye in previous to that, but it didn't really become known until people, as Deb mentioned earlier, discovered this bottom bouncing technique that they could encounter sockeye. Also, there was a major shift in fishing activity related to Chinook and coho fishing, and significant management measures, conservation measures were put in place for Chinook and coho conservation. And folks started to redirect their efforts onto other species like sockeye, like halibut, crab, prawn. And we started to see diminishing returns and poorer ocean survival in the Strait of Georgia, particularly related to coho fishing. And coho and Chinook fishing, as mentioned and is outlined clearly in the salmon allocation policies, coho and Chinook fisheries were the backbone of the recreational fishery, salmon fishery in the province, and that started to decline, and folks started to look for other opportunities, and sockeye became that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and Ms. Snedden?
Right, a couple other things that we think were provided people to target on sockeye were the cost of marine fishing has gone up. You know, the cost to own a boat and gas and all those things associated with it. With the economic decline, people were more inclined to fish areas where you could just drive to the edge of the river and throw out a line. It was a lot cheaper to go out fishing on the river than it is to go in the ocean. Also, the population in the Fraser Valley and in Vancouver has increased dramatically since the mid-90s, and that we brought in a lot of anglers from other areas. You know, they've moved here and they are avid anglers wanting to get out into the environment and fish, and so those two pieces, as well as what Devona mentioned.
All right, thank you. And
Tim, just I think did you mention as well, just on that the sockeye in the mid-90s, the fishery was opened in the Fraser. I'm not sure if that was mentioned. That it was only reopened to the retention of sockeye in 1995. So prior to that, you weren't allowed to retain any sockeye.
thank you. Ms. Adams, can you describe what your understanding is of the value of the recreational Fraser River sockeye fishery?
I think the value of all fisheries is a hotly debated issue amongst all the different stakeholders and First Nations. We've seen estimates from a number of different sources that have estimated the value for both freshwater and marine recreational fisheries to be upwards of $1.2 billion annually. And that includes both direct expenditures as well as partial investments.
And is that for the recreational fishery for all species, or is that directed towards Fraser River sockeye?
That's for all species. And I would just like to add that my experience with fisheries, and I would say an area of concern is there's always the debate around what the economic value of the various fisheries are. And from my perspective, I feel that all the fisheries in British Columbia are valuable, and we don't seem to have a common metrics across all fisheries to measure them, because it's not just about dollars and cents, it's about the social value of fisheries and also the cultural value and the different jobs that it creates in the economy and the communities as well. It's more than just dollars and cents.
And Ms. Snedden, could you give us an example of what a tackle shop in Chilliwack would look like when the Fraser River sockeye fishery is open?
Right, so as Devona pointed out, all fisheries are definitely valid. Recreational fisheries no different than any other, but in the Lower Mainland, there's a number of major tackle shops where people are going to go and get their gear to go out and fish. In the Chilliwack area alone, there's 4 shops. If you go into one when there's a sockeye opening, not when in May, but in a sockeye opening in August, on a one day in August, early in the fishery, they can take in anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 a day in retail sales, and you will have a lineup of 15 people at the cash register all day long.
Thank you. Ms. Adams, earlier this morning, the Commissioner asked a question about how he should rate or place emphasis on the various DFO policies or visions or initiatives, and he gave an example of a number of different documents and language that DFO has used. And I was thinking that if we could move to, Mr. Registrar, to Exhibit 445, which is the IFMP from 2010-2011. And if we could move to page 13 of 233. Ms. Adams and or Ms. Snedden, if you could perhaps describe how the IFMP and this section on the policy framework for the management of Pacific salmon fisheries could assist in answering the question that the Commissioner posed to you.
Yes, it was a good question from the Commissioner, and I mean, it is confusing, and one of the ways that the department has tried to reduce the confusion, or at least make it a bit more open and transparent, was to start the initiation of developing integrated fisheries management plans. That started about 15 years ago, and the reason we wanted to do it is because there are so many documents. There's the Fisheries Acts, Species at Risk Act, there's acts and policies and regulations, there's different directives and initiatives, and so how does one in any aspect of the fishery try and understand and make sense of it all? So one of the pieces that we did was develop a listing in the integrated fisheries management plan of the various drivers that drive, the public policy and government policy. And they're noted, as you mentioned, in the South Coast Salmon IFMP, and it outlines the policy framework there on page 13. It goes through the number of different drivers. As we go through the document, it talks about conservation policies, access policies, wild salmon policy, species at risk, the list goes on, but these are all elements that as staff working on salmon fisheries we're aware of, and we're using these to incorporate into our operationalizing of this plan. And Deb can speak more specifically on the Fraser arrangements, because there's a number of specific drivers and policies, regulations and processes that deal with the salmon, in particular Fraser sockeye salmon.
And I note that this section, Policy Framework for the Management of Pacific Salmon Fisheries, page 13, 14, and 15 provides a bit of a narrative of the development of DFO's policies and over the years. And would that be a fair estimate that there's policies that have been in existence, and then there's drivers as to new directions that are taking place?
Yes, I mean the overarching regulations, acts, case law, international obligations under treaties, a number of those are well established and have been in place for a number of years. And as time evolves, we have developed additional policies like the wild salmon policy, selective fisheries, catch monitoring policy, salmon allocation. And what we try and do in the integrated fisheries management plan is trying to figure out, okay, we've got these overarching policies and acts and regulations. That's nice. but how do we actually make that work on the ground and on the water? And that's what we're trying to do through the integrated harvest planning, is outline what it is. Then we've got some decision guidelines. We talked about different decision guidelines for sockeye earlier today. And we try and put them in one place that all the different stakeholders can see in one place, as opposed to rules being made up in season, people not knowing what the rules of the road are. And that was the intent behind the Integrated Fisheries Management Plan. And in my experience, it continues. Every year we add things to it. It's not that we've arrived, we're continuing to build on it. So this year's Integrated Fisheries Management Plans will include social and economic pieces in here. It's a start. And that we keep doing every year. We're adding additional information as it becomes available to us, so that it's open, it's there for everyone to see. We're not in a back room making up the policies, they're there.
Right. And then just for clarity, then the IFMP then is that you consult with the various groups annually as to the development of this plan.
Yes, we do, probably more than they would like.
All right. So perhaps we, and I just note,
Exhibit number was asked first.
yes, this is
Do you want to add something? Okay.
Exhibit 445. Yeah. And I note on page 13 it references Pacific Fisheries Reform announced by the department in April of 2005. And Mr. Lund, if we could perhaps just pop quickly to Exhibit 269. And Ms. Adams, can you identify this this document as the Pacific Fisheries Reform?
Yes.
And for the assistance of the record, this is the document that Jeff Grout spoke about in his testimony under the commercial fishing panel. So going back then to the IFMP, if we may, Mr. Registrar, if we could then perhaps turn to page, I'd like you to sort of walk us through the IFMP as to where the sections are that reference Fraser River sockeye salmon. So page 25. This is section 3.8 on the Pacific Salmon Treaty. And again, Ms. Adams and or Ms. Snedden, if you could walk us through the relevance of this section.
Right, so as I mentioned earlier, when we go out and consult with the groups, we start at the lowest level of the Sportfish Advisory Committee. And, you know, as you see by the size of this document, it's pretty challenging for us to consult on every page in it. So we reference the important parts that we think they need to definitely look at every year and provide us advice on. And one of the places we would start is section 3.8, Pacific Salmon Treaty on page 25. And so in this section talks about what our international obligations are and how we might meet them. The next page talks about the Pacific Salmon Treaty renewal, because we are in discussions. I think we actually might have concluded them on some species already, but it gives an update on where we're at with our negotiations with the U.S. After that point, I think we go to...
So then there's section 4.1, fishery management objectives for stock of concerns.
Right, so on page 28, it talks about our concerns for Cultus Lake and late run sockeye, and it outlines how we're going to manage them pre-season, so there's no surprises coming along, hopefully.
All right, and just so at the record, that's section 4.1.2, interior Fraser River coho, lower Fraser coho, and straight. Oh, that's
It's
coho.
right below that one. It's 4.1.3.
Okay, thank
so
you.
that's Cultus Lake and late run sockeye, and both of those are Fraser River sockeye. Okay.
Right, okay. And then I understand we should move to page 71 through 82.
Yes. So that's the Fraser River sockeye decision guidelines. So it talks in just basic terms about how we're going to manage. What's our total mortality going to look like? How many fish do we want to see on the spawning grounds? It lays it out clearly for everybody to see what our plan is, what are our decision points for each stock group.
All right, and then the sockeye recreational section.
Yes, so Section 7 is the Southern BC Fraser River Recreational Fishing Plan, and specific to sockeye is Section 7.4 on page 115. It's currently very skimpy in information, and I actually noted that as we were preparing for this, and we'll be bulking that up for the next version of it. But it does talk a little bit about, we need to make sure that we manage and according to our conservation, our goals for Cultus, Sackinaw, Nipkish, and Fraser late run sockeye. And it talks in general terms about what our anticipated opportunities might be.
All right, and then we should turn finally to Appendix 6 at page 179.
Yeah, so there's 2 appendices that are important for the recreational fishery. This is the first one, and it's the tidal salmon sport fishing guidelines. So earlier we looked at the sport fishing guide, and we said, maybe that it might be somewhat out of date at print.
Can I just stop you just for a second? I
Yes.
apologize, Mr. Timberg, I'm sorry. Just so I understand, I believe I understand, this is the IFMP for the entire fishery.
This is for the salmon, southern coast fishery. Yeah.
Not just the recreational fishery, but...
That's correct. It's an integrated process, yeah.
And just refresh my memory again. Are the allocation numbers in this document?
You know what? I don't know if they are in there or not. The 95.5. I don't know. There wouldn't be specific.
It would refer
So
to
appendix,
it under the-
okay, sorry, we're all talking at the
Yeah,
same
sorry,
time.
go ahead.
Jeff Grout, under the commercial fishery, spoke about Appendix 4. And if we turn to that, that's at page 169. And so that's the Pacific Salmon Allocation and Implementation Plan. And so that'll be the commercial numbers, I believe. And then if we're now, these witnesses for the recreational fishing are speaking about Appendix 6 at page 179. And so here's the recreational. And I believe you'll have the First Nations portion explained to you under the First Nations section, which is to come. I believe it is, but I'm not the expert on that. But the purpose of the IFMP is to integrate all of the various sectors together so we can pull the commercial, the recreational, the First Nations together. And the goal, as I understand it, is to consult using the same document to pull people together. Because previously, I understand the consultations happened separately, and that led to some problems. So this is the integrated portion. And so is that, Ms. Adams, I'll ask you to elaborate on what I've just said.
Yeah, as I was mentioning earlier, we used to have separate processes with different groups, or maybe no process at all. And there was concern that people felt that, first of all, they didn't know what each other were asking for in their fisheries, and they didn't understand what government's objectives were, or even what government's policies and regulations were. And so that was the start of the integrated fisheries management planning process. And it started with salmon, and it's evolved into all of our major shellfish fisheries and groundfish fisheries and pelagic, like herring species as well. And I think it's been a good process because people can see up front the policies and the regulations and the acts that are driving the work that we do. And then it's up to us as frontline fishery managers and also the different harvesting sectors to figure out, okay, how are we going to take these high-level policies and actually make it work when we get a return of sockeye salmon of 600,000, or we get a return of 25 million. Like, how will we actually conduct ourselves? And that's the whole, I guess, the real driver behind why we do integrated fisheries management plans. So we'll develop proposals individually with different stakeholders and First Nations. Then we'll come to the integrated harvest planning meetings together with all of the stakeholders in one room, and we will discuss with them areas of concern. And we will try and find ways to resolve those concerns within our fisheries management planning process for the year. And Deb, I don't know if you want to add more specifics with regards to the sockeye planning.
Decision making and about the various hats that DFO staff wear to make decisions and attend at meetings, consult with respect to the priority of conservation first, food, social, and ceremonial priority second, and then the equal priority to commercial and recreational fishing as set out under the allocation policy. So the step 1, 2, 3. So I'm wondering, after we've had this conversation about the IFMP process, if you could describe how, I'll start with you, Ms. Adams, how you in your position handle these various responsibilities of the different priorities.
We have a team of staff comprised of enforcement officers, stock assessment, and fishery managers. And we have an area-based structure. So for Fraser Soca, we have Southern BC staff that are involved from all of those different areas of expertise, as well as the Lower Fraser, the BC Interior, and then regional headquarters here in Vancouver. And our job is to bring forward the interests of all of the parties, including government's interests, and then to consider the advice that we receive from the different parties and make recommendations to our senior decision makers. And obviously in the region, for Fraser Soca, the two key decision makers would be our Regional Director General and our Chair of the Fraser River Panel.
And that's Sue Farlinger as the Regional Deputy General?
Yes.
And then that's Brian...
Barry Rosenberger is currently the Canadian Chair of the Fraser River Panel.
And so how then, just to further elaborate on that, with the various policies as the acts, the regs, and the policies as described in the IFMP, how do you apply those in making your recommendations?
Well, just to clarify, just stepping back, the Fraser River Panel waters are their authorities go up to the Mission Bridge, and they don't include First Nations food, social, ceremonial fisheries. They don't have authorities over that. That's the Government of Canada's responsibility. Really what we use in season, we're looking at the salmon allocation policy, we're looking at the salmon treaty, where we're working with through the Fraser Panel, and we're looking at some species at risk content, and selective fisheries policy, and we're developing our in-season operations and conduct of our fisheries based on those salmon related policies and acts and regulations.
All right, and with respect to the question about then the various hats that people wear, can you clarify, how would you answer that?
We work as a team, both area staff and our regional headquarters staff, and we have our team is comprised of a number of different folks who have different expertise. So we would have, as I mentioned, our enforcement staff, we have stock assessment staff, and we have fishery management staff, and it's the job of those folks on the front line to bring forward the interests of the different First Nations groups as well as other harvesters as to how they would like to prosecute a fishery. And we are also obviously checking with our own government objectives around will that work within the Cultus Sockeye management objective or the Sakana Sockeye management objectives, or early steward or late run sockeye objectives.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions on this topic?
Just one very brief one, Mr. Timmer.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for you allowing me to do this. I apologize for interrupting your chief.
No.
Just on this last couple of questions you asked, if I understood Jeff Grove's testimony, this document that you have on the screen, the IF, the Integrated Fisheries Management Plan, lots of acronyms here, it goes to the IHPC for discussion. But as I understand it, by the time it gets to the IHPC, this is all filled in. The boxes are filled in. The allocation, the issues that are set out in here are addressed to be discussed by the members of the IHPC. But at what point in this sequence is there a discussion amongst the stakeholders and the DFO around the general policy considerations? In other words, not focusing on what this year's allocation is going to be, or what the tax is going to be, or what the pre-season forecast is. Rather, when do you have a discussion about, how should TAC be developed? What should we do with the pre-season forecast? Allocation policy, how should it be administered? Those kinds of things. When does that happen?
I think some of it happens at all of the different consultations we have with the respective harvesting groups. So when I meet with the recreational fishing community, we talk about some of those things. We also talk about the policy, those bigger capital P policy issues at the integrated harvest planning meetings as well. We probably don't spend as much time on that as we would like, because there's this angst to go fishing and let's get the plan developed, and probably an area I think several people would want to see more time spent on is input to public policy and some of the key policies that drive our fisheries.
Tim, can I add to that?
Yes.
So just in recent years, our communications group has put together, we call it the Fall Road Show, and it's a consultation package, and it's when we're trying to develop new policies or new initiatives, and a wide group of people go out, and we go to many communities across BC, taking these new policies and new discussion documents out and getting feedback on them from not just industry people, but also from the public. And so that generally is in the fall of each year.
Ms. Adams, this morning you were asked about what methods or tools would managers like to use in the Fraser sockeye fishery that are not included in regulations. And I think you gave an answer as an example, circle hook. And I was wondering if there were other methods or tools you would like that are not presently in the regulations.
We've had some suggestions from the recreational fishing community, although it's a fine line. They don't really like us to be in the tackle box and regulate them to death. But some of them have expressed an interest in having a regulation that limits a certain length of the leader line that is on their fishing rod, which would help avoid sockeye when we don't want them to even encounter a sockeye. There's also been suggestions to look at...
Can you describe that a bit
They
more?
probably
What,
could, yeah.
what the length of a leader line is?
Let me just start with the bottom bouncing method. So it is, you've got a rod with a line on it, you've got, it's called a leader, and it goes from basically a swivel hook, little tiny swivel hook, out to your hook, your main hook. And somewhere attached on there is a weight called a bouncing Betty.
Now, did you bring a sample?
I did. I actually do have one if you're interested. If anybody's
Can you
interested
grab
in
it
seeing
quickly?
what it looks like.
Is that a quick request or is that a
No, it's a quick request.
Okay.
I could maybe just answer some of the other
Sure.
questions. A couple of other suggestions that we've received from the recreational fishing community is to do something similar to what the province of BC regulations are, and that is to put in a regulation where once a person has achieved their daily limit of sockeye salmon, that they must cease fishing immediately. So you can't continue to fish even for catch and release, and you can't continue to fish for Chinook. You're done. Once you've got 2 sockeye, you're done. And I observed that practice being used down in Lake Washington sockeye fishery, where they have millions of anglers out on Lake Washington in one day, and it could turn into a real free-for-all, but it doesn't, because there is this regulation where once you catch your 1 sockeye, the line is in the boat. You're done. And so I know our colleagues in the province of BC use that regulation for steelhead, and I think we need to do some more, or have some more dialogue with them as to the effectiveness of how that works for steelhead and whether it would be appropriate to do that with sockeye in the Fraser.
And so, as I understand it right now, an angler could catch their 2 fish limit, but then continue to do catch and release for the next number of hours?
Yes, that's correct, because...
And what's the problem with that? Or why do you want to limit that?
Well, I think, as we've mentioned earlier today, there's times and situations where we don't want them to continue fishing. We'd like them to stop fishing and leave, basically either allow others to fish,
Right.
and not have the release mortality. So I think that would certainly be one option, but there's several others that I think need to be explored, and we need to have dialogue with the community on.
All right, and before we turn back to Ms. Snedden, is there another one with respect to limiting certain methods at certain times?
I think Deb can speak to that
Okay.
with weights.
Right, yeah. So the main fishing method in the Fraser River for sockeye is bottom bouncing. And so, as I mentioned, it's a leader. Here, Joe, why don't you stretch that out? This is a standard operation for fishing. Got a hook with a little bit of wool so you can see it when it flies back at you and doesn't get caught in your face. A bouncing Betty, you tie to that end. And as you throw it out in the river, that weight is going to bounce along the bottom, and this is going to be out there free floating and hopefully going to catch a fish through its mouth. Careful. Yes, I don't want to cover myself. So There's three things associated with this that would help us in regulating. One is to say, eliminate that gear type. Say, for a certain time period, you may not want them to bottom bounce. So if you had a regulation that would say no bottom bouncing during this time period, you could implement it. We don't have that regulation currently.
And so before you move on, why would you want to have a regulation to limit bottom bouncing?
Right. So let's say August of 2007 or August of 2009, when our only choices, when the stocks of when sockeye stocks did not return, were to either close the fishery completely or leave it open and have release mortalities. We had to go to close the fishery completely in order to reduce mortalities on sockeye. If we had no bottom bouncing, we could continue to allow the Chinook fishing to occur, because Chinook fishing is done by, can be done by a bar rig, which is you throw a line out, fish comes up and actually bites a lure, which a sockeye doesn't. Chinook still feed while they're in there. I don't know if they feed. They get annoyed by what they see and they actually bite the lure. So we would be allowing people to fish for a species that's abundant, that's not of concern, with a method that is selective enough for them.
Right. And so bottom bouncing's not a selective fishing technique.
I would say that it is a selective fishing technique in clear water,
Right.
for sure. In the Fraser River, it is not as selective as other methods that you would be using to target other species.
Right. And that's because of the water's not
Water's
clear.
not clear.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
they're not seeing it. So one of the things is eliminating bottom bouncing for a certain period of time. The other thing is the length of this leader. So people use anywhere up to 25 feet. If you only had 2 feet, that basically eliminates bottom bouncing as well, because if the fish is that close to you, it's probably not going to be caught on your line. And the third one is the size of that weight. If we said instead they had to use a 3-pound weight, well, it isn't going to bounce anywhere. You're going to throw it out there and it's going to stay there. So
Right.
that would also eliminate it.
Okay. So, and presently you don't have those abilities.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Joe has something to add.
And
too.
I would just add that for us to get regulatory changes in place, it takes up to 3 years to do that. So we need to make sure we've got it. What we want is definitely what's going to address the problem, and then put it forward. And we're waiting probably for about 3 years before it's passed through regulation.
Okay. Thank you.
And maybe the only thing I'll add, and I hope it doesn't confuse the issue, I know some of the documents talks about bottom bouncing and flossing. And the reason it's called flossing is, and how it's related to the length of the leader is, as the cast for this sort of gear is generally upstream, and the leader will travel kind of perpendicular to you across the river this way. And as it's retrieved, that's when the fish is hooked, and it's called flossing because as this leader is going down the river, fish are moving up the river doing this. The line goes in, and as it's being retrieved, the line goes through, and eventually you get the hook, and that's why it's on the outside of the mouth. So that's the reason for flossing. Adjusting the leader length will make less leader, less flossing, less catch. So that's...
And part of the reason for the low catch and release mortality, at least within 24-hour period, is that the hook is on the outside of the mouth. That's one of the major factors.
So there's not a lot of, with the flossing technique and the hook on the outside of the mouth, yes, it's the physical damage that's being really assessed in that 24-hour period. I mean, it could be the handling as well,
Right.
but yeah, it's that physical damage is less on the outside of the mouth.
Again, Ms. Adams, the vision document that has been put into evidence by Commission Council spoke about shared stewardship. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on what you mean by shared stewardship and what is its importance.
I mean, there is basically something that we're just starting to work on, and what we're trying to do is find areas where, regardless of what harvesting sector or group that you're with, there's areas of common interest. So, for instance, in a lot of the freshwater areas, there's a common interest on water use. There's a common interest on habitat as it relates to salmon. And I mean, I think other groups will have probably brought forward or will concerns about gravel, concerns about independent power projects. So there's a number of groups that are trying to work together, regardless of whether you're a First Nation person, a commercial fisherman, or a recreational harvester, or a conservation group. There's areas like that where they have common interests, and they're willing to work together to try and address some of those common concerns. And we've seen examples of them. Some of the groups Deb works with in the Fraser and Squamish watersheds have done some shared stewardship, so I probably just pass it to her to add to that.
All right.
Right, so there's a couple of very good examples in the Fraser, Lower Fraser area. So the first one would be the Squamish to Lillooet Sport Fish Advisory Committee. So you've got the terms of reference from that. Devona mentioned them earlier. It has generally been just a recreationally focused group. In the Squamish area, in the Squamish to Lillooet area, it's a small community. They, as Devona points out, they have a lot of the same interests. And at first we had some First Nations expressing some interest about coming and observing these meetings. And they came and observed, and then everybody realized that they had a lot of things of value to contribute to the discussion. And so in the end, they have become members of the committee. And so even though they're not recreational anglers, they're part of the Sport Fish Advisory Committee, and they're active participants. And it has certainly helped us in managing the fishery in those areas. Another good example is on the Chehalis River with the Chehalis First Nation and the BC Federation of Drift Fishers, and they worked together. They got some funding from somewhere, and they built a fishing trail that helped address some of the concerns Chehalis had around recreational anglers accessing the Chehalis River on their reserve. And there were some trespass issues, there were some sacred sites they didn't want disturbed, there were parking issues, and the group worked really closely together and developed some excellent fishing trails and really improved relationships between the recreational anglers and the First Nation there in that area.
And Mr. Registrar, if we could have from Canada's Book of Documents, tab 10. While we're waiting for that to come up, do you have an example about the Fraser River Salmon Table Society?
You know, I'm not as intimately involved in the Fraser River Salmon Table, but it is a group that is not just recreational and First Nation, it also is commercial, and they have done some work together in trying to build bridges, educate each other about each other's fisheries, and improve relationships.
And Ms. Snudden, if you could identify, is this the document about the Chehalis Salmon Sport Fishing Trail you just spoke about?
Yes, that is. Actually, and on the Fraser Salmon Table, there is something else going on right now. They are working with First Nations. They've got some funding to look at a proposal to develop some camping sites on the Fraser River. There's really none on there, and they're working together right now to try and build a business plan to get some interest in generating something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And this could be marked as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 537.
Ms. Snedden, this morning you spoke about the Barkley Sound sockeye recreational fishery, and you said it's significant. I'd like you to elaborate. Can you clarify what the source of the sockeye salmon is? In Barkley Sound, are they Fraser River sockeye salmon?
Correct. When I was talking about the recreational sockeye fishery in BC, and I was trying to explain that the coast-wide cap, the 5% the recreational fishery has access to, includes sockeye from all different areas. So there's Barkley sockeye, there's Nass sockeye, and there's Fraser River sockeye. So Barkley sockeye is on the west coast, Vancouver Island. It's fish returning to the Somas system. There's a couple of rivers in there that they go to, or lakes that they come from, into the Somas.
All right, so your first point is that under the allocation policy, the 5% allocation is coast-wide
sockeye.
all species.
Yeah.
Right?
Coast-wide sockeye, coast-wide
sockeye,
chum, coast-wide
right.
pink. Yes.
Okay, so that's how that's done. And then I'd like to understand more about the Barkley Sound sockeye recreational fishery.
Right. The Barkley Sound recreational fishery, again, it's not a Fraser River fishery. It's a different stock completely. They don't access it. The fishery takes place mostly...
So it's not a Fraser River sockeye salmon?
No, it takes place mostly in Barkley Sound and in Alberni Inlet. It's a very terminal fishery.
And the fish come from the Somas River, is that correct?
Yeah, a Great Central Lake and Somas River. Yeah,
Right.
sorry.
Fair enough. You know it's not
Yeah.
the Fraser River sockeye.
100% not Fraser.
Okay. And when you say that it's significant, perhaps just to round out that picture, just so we know a bit of the dynamics, just briefly.
Well, in the percentage of the 5% for recreational, it's not significant. In the percentage of catch within the Alberni Inlet between commercial, recreational, and First Nation, it in some years can be significant. Numbers, I don't have numbers, but it can be, I'd say, significant in the 30% range.
Right. All right. Now again, Ms. Snedden, this morning you spoke about catch and release mortality studies, and you said that NSERC is looking at longer-term catch and release mortality studies. So first of all, can you describe what the acronym NSERC stands for? I think it's NSERC.
Right, that's the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council. I do believe it is a government agency that provides funding for people, mainly academics, to conduct research.
And do you know the academic that's conducting the research?
Right, so the long-term mortality study is a fellow out of Carleton University. His name is Dr. Stephen Cook, and he is looking at long-term release mortalities from all fisheries.
Okay, so he's looking at commercial fishery, recreational fishery, First Nations fishery?
He's not looking specifically at commercial fishery or First Nation fishery or recreational fishery. He's looking at the gear that is being used. So
Okay.
because some of those gears are being used by multiple sectors. And I think Joe has something to add.
All right.
Just to add, yes, so NSERC is a funding body, and they fund generally through universities. UBC is also, Scott Hinch, Dr. Hinch at UBC as well, is in partnership with Steve Cook out of Carleton University. And the funding is given to these universities. They have to engage as well, be associated with a government body like Department of Fisheries and Oceans like us. So we're involved in the study as well. And, generally they are looking at release mortality. So regardless of sector that's doing the harvest, regardless of the type of gear that's being used, it's release mortality. They did, for the first year, focus on recreational. What they are using is they're trying to using DFO and a lot of the work that we conduct as platforms to do additional work at reduced cost. But they can also do that with First Nation fisheries as well, looking at coho mortality and a pink beach seine fishery. They piggybacked on the J.O. Thomas study pardon me? They piggybacked on that study to try to leverage more information out of those studies using other techniques, radio telemetry and things like that. So I hope that adds.
And this study is looking at sockeye salmon, is that correct? That's part of one of the species they're looking at?
They're looking at sockeye, but they're looking at all species.
All right, thank you. And do you know when this work will be completed or when it started?
My understanding, it was a 5-year funding envelope that started in 2009.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is, perhaps for the panel, is what changes do you think are needed in the recreational fishery that will ensure the future sustainability of Fraser River sockeye? If you've already answered that, I'm just trying to give you an opportunity to make sure you've provided all your recommendations.
We did cover off some regulatory changes. I think given the magnitude of the number of participants that participate in recreational fisheries in general, and in particular Fraser sockeye, I think we will always need to continue work on communication, education, and awareness because of the size of the group of people that we're dealing with. I also strongly support increased strategic improvements to catch monitoring across the board, and I know that we're working on those, and I think that's very valuable because you can't make good decisions with poor information. Deb, you might want to add a few things.
And I guess just, we haven't talked too much about it, but, Devona was mentioning the number of staff that are dedicated to recreational fisheries management. It has gone down since the mid-90s, and I'm not sure that's the best for recreational management, but it's the direction we're at now, and perhaps additional resources both there and within our enforcement.
All right. Mr. Tatey? I guess I should leave that for my friend. I apologize. I've completed my questions, Mr. Commissioner, and Ms. Grandy McNeil has a few questions. Oh, should we adjourn now? Thank you.
Hearing is now adjourned for the day. We'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.